faithful servant. Ammon Troy, better known as AP, was born in June 1896 in Charm, Ohio. He married Huldah Bender, and together they had 4 children, Alma, Raymond, Viola, and Marvin. In 1930, they made a decision to leave their home in Kokomo, Indiana, and move to Greenwood, Delaware. The decision to move was in part due to Uncle Felty Bender, who wrote to my grandparents giving a good report of the church in Greenwood with a Christian day school in its 2nd year of operation. If the Troyers stayed, a decision needed to be made about a change in churches. So on August the 14th, 1930, my grandparents loaded their car, a Star, with their 4 children, the oldest being 11, the youngest 2. The dog Pearlie had to go along. The children promised they would hold him on their laps, and Grandma couldn't leave her houseplants behind. They lined the back window of the car. They waved goodbye to lots of Amish cousins that morning and headed east. The trip to Delaware took 2 weeks, stopping at relatives along the way, even working a day or two at several places. One stop was in Grantsville, Maryland, where they stayed several days. My mother didn't realize that there in those very mountains lived a cute little boy, only 13 years old, who would one day leave the coal mines and follow her to Greenwood. When my grandparents arrived in Greenwood, the first place they lived was in Dave Yoder's house on the curve where Linford Weber now lives. Grandpa got a job in Greenwood at the fiber plant. In 1934, they moved to the house where Shirley Breifogel lived. It was while living here that Grandpa took the job as janitor or caretaker at the old white church. This job involved cleaning the church building, mowing the grass, or seeing to it that it was done, getting the fire started on Saturday evening in the big furnace in the basement, and keeping it going through Sunday. In the earlier days, he also had the lanterns to clean, fill, trim, and light. A row of gasoline lanterns hung down the center of the church, and one in each anteroom. In 1938, the family moved to a farm close to where Eli Mast now lives. There they had a large asparagus patch, along with other farming. In 1943, they moved to Beaver Street in Greenwood. My grandfather was born with a hereditary muscular atrophy affecting his hands and feet, which made manual labor hard for him. For many years, he was a door-to-door salesman, peddling Watson's products. He later expanded to Raleigh, McNess, and Blair. He enjoyed meeting people and had many, many friends with his route. The entryway to their home was filled with shelves of cinnamon, cloves, shampoo, liniment, fly spray, mops, you name it. I can almost smell it yet. In 1947, the new brick church was built. Now the job of heating was much easier with the new hot air furnace, but there was a lot more to clean. My mother remembers that he set aside 1 day a week to clean the church. It was basically his job. Grandma was at home, and the children helped only a little. Grandpa thoroughly enjoyed this job. Grandma stayed at home all those years. She did a lot of babysitting for young children, even infants. One baby, Wilma Carson, they took as an infant and raised as their own daughter. She later cared for mentally handicapped adults. The church was very important to Grandpa, and he took his job of cleaning and ventilating seriously. He tried hard to please everyone and keep everyone comfortable. He'd limp up the side aisle, using one crutch in later years, and raise or lower windows, holding his hand up in a window to feel the breeze. And sometimes he'd lean across the bench to whisper to Grandma, was it too cool, too warm? Once he told us about a problem with water in the basement. He said, I just went down the basement and sat down and studied on it. The church was central in his life. He was very interested in the work of the church and kept in close contact with the leaders, always ready to voice his opinion and give support however he could. A few years back, our family cleaned the church for a while, and I often thought of him and wondered, how did he do it? Crippled as he was, carrying the vacuum cleaner up and down steps. I also began to realize how one can become somewhat possessive. When you work hard to clean the church, you don't like to see people careless about keeping it that way. I know Grandpa felt that way, and he didn't want anyone tampering with the thermostat or changing the clock either. He took pride in doing a good job, and he worked very hard. After cleaning became too difficult for him, he turned it over to Edna Slaybaugh in 1957 at the age of 63. He did continue to open and close the church and do the ventilating, until Christopher took this over when the new furnace was installed. As Grandpa grew older, he gave up his peddling route, only selling out of his house. One of his hobbies in his later years was making copies of tapes to pass around to his children and grandchildren. He would copy the Sunday sermon or a sermon from the radio. He found much enjoyment in this. When he had a little space on the end of a tape, he'd quote a Bible verse. One of his favorite was Romans 8:28. And we know that all things work together for good to those who love God, to those who are the called according to his purpose.